So, Congressman Simpson, would you please commence with 4 minutes of opening remarks? Thank you.
Certainly, thank you, and thank you all for being here. First, I want to thank the City Club for hosting this debate, for Dr. Adler for moderating this debate, and for all of you for being here today and participating in this. I'm running for re-election for 2 very simple reasons. Because of the accomplishments I've been able to achieve for Idaho and for the second Congressional District of Idaho, and the fact that there are big challenges facing this country, and we need people willing to make tough decisions that it will take to solve these problems. First, a few of the accomplishments. The Idaho National Laboratory. Working with the state, the DOE, the Navy, and the delegation, we've been able to refocus the mission at the lab, built and equipped new research facilities, those that you see across the railroad tracks here and out on the desert, making the INL the lead nuclear lab in the country. This didn't just happen. It took a great deal of work by the contractors, the state, DOE, and the delegation to get this done. Wolves. I've been able to delist wolves in Idaho with the help of a Democratic administration and a Democratic Secretary of Interior, Secretary Salazar. I've been able to delist wolves in Idaho and Montana and return control back over to the states where it should be. I've been able to prevent the administration's wildland policies and be able to block that policy through the appropriation process. I've kept the Du Bois Sheep Station alive and operating over this last year when the administration proposed to close it. I've helped with my colleague from Minnesota, the Democratic ranking member of the Agriculture Committee. We've worked on the Dairy Security Act, and while we didn't get everything we wanted, we've made significant changes in the dairy program, which will help the dairy industry in Idaho. We've moved it in the right direction. Through the appropriations process and committee that I sit on the Appropriations Committee, it's my language in the current appropriation bills that are under consideration that will increase truck weights on the interstates in Idaho to 129,000 pounds, decreasing the cost to transportation for the agricultural community by 15%. We have a strange situation in Idaho. We're kind of a donut. States surrounding us have 129,000 weights. We have 129,000 weight on state highways. But where would you like those heavy trucks? You'd want them on the interstate, but they can't go on the interstate because of federal law. It's my language in the appropriation bills that would change that. It's my language that would defund the ridiculous rule banning the purchase of white potatoes by WIC participants. This is the stupidest rule I've ever seen in my life. It is, if you are a WIC participant, you can buy white potatoes. Well, you can't buy white potatoes if you buy them in a grocery store, but you can buy white potatoes if you buy them in a farmer's market. The WIC program is a nutrition program. It's not a where you buy it program. So we've got language trying to prevent the administration from implementing that rule. I also have got language in that would reverse the EPA's overreach and total overreach on the new navigable waters rule that they have recently published that I think would be devastating to Idaho and to western United States. Now for the second reason that I'm running, the challenges we face. Almost every problem we face and every solution we discuss is framed by the debt and deficit. If we don't get the debt and deficit under control, we won't have the resources to address the problems we face. I'm proud to be a member of the committee that doesn't just talk about cutting spending, but is doing the tough job of actually cutting spending. 4 years in a row, we've reduced the budget. Not in Washington terms, reducing the increase, actually reducing spending. That's why Steny Hoyer, but spending cuts alone will not solve this problem. That's why Steny Hoyer, the Democratic whip, and I formed the Go Big Coalition, a group of over 100 Republicans and Democrats to solve this problem.
Thank you.
Red card came up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Congressman Stallings, 4 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. It's nice to be back, to see a lot of old friends. I appreciate this opportunity to present some views that are contrary to what you've heard from Mr. Simpson, but my purpose in running is unlike his. I'm running against the worst Congress in the history of our nation. By anybody's standards, this Congress is the least productive, more damaging, more destructive than any Congress we've ever had. In fact, by Mr. Boehner's own standard, he said, don't judge us by what we passed, judge us by what we've repealed. To this date, they've repealed nothing. Now, the House has voted to repeal Obamacare a number of times, and I don't know how many times you have to repeal it. 50 seems plenty, but I would think that once or twice would send the message that they're not happy with it. But so far, they've passed very little, repealed nothing, and in fact have not only squandered taxpayer dollars, but they've hurt people. This Congress has been so nasty to the people they should be serving. I find it just incredible. For example, we have in this state 176,000 people living in poverty. Main reason for that poverty, Congress will not raise the minimum wage. There's popular support for it in Idaho. There's support for it in the Congress. But Mr. Boehner and Mr. Simpson and his friends will not bring it to the floor because they want to punish these poor single moms, these students, these single dads. Do you know that minimum wage is a woman's issue? 52% of the folks on minimum wage are women. You cannot live on 7.25, and yet when he talks about deficit reduction, here's a way you could reduce deficits. You could cut the food stamp program by giving people a decent wage, a living wage. Cities that have raised the minimum wage are prospering, while Idaho has the largest number of people on minimum wage in the nation. It's a no-brainer issue. Everyone benefits, but for some reason, this Congress won't support it. Now, Mr. Simpson's a good friend of Mitt Romney, and Romney seems to be the foremost spokesman on virtually everything in the state. He says raise the minimum wage, and yet they won't do it. Immigration reform. 11 million people living in the shadows, and an issue that could be solved in a heartbeat. The Senate has already dealt with it. Mr. Simpson, Mr. Boehner won't bring it to the floor because they know there's votes for it there. And so they leave these people out in the cold. I've got a young man working for me. He's what they call a dreamer. Dreamer are children who came to this country in their parents' arms. This kid came at 6 months old. He graduated the top of his class in Burley. He cannot go to Idaho State without paying out-of-state tuition. He cannot apply for scholarships because he's undocumented. Mr. Simpson's response, send him back. So where do you send this kid back to? Burley? I mean, that's not a foreign country. Man, that's part of the United States. And to send these kids back like that is criminal. He won't deal with equal salaries for equal work for women. They've been there before the Congress a number of times. And so a woman is bound to make 26 or 24 or 22% less than a man for doing exactly the same job. Folks, that's wrong. That is absolutely wrong. There is no logical reason for it, and I think that that needs to be addressed. Simpson and Boehner won't bring it to the floor. Students. Do you know that there's a bill before the Congress to let students refinance their college loans? I suppose most of you had college loans at one time or another. You can refinance your property loans. You can refinance your car loans. You cannot refinance your student loans. So you force these kids to pay even more and more money. 2 votes that he did do that I think is very damaging. The first, the Ryan budget calls for putting Medicare in vouchers. That will dismantle Medicare as you and I know it, and it would do tremendous damage to the old people. The second, when he voted to close down the government. 17 days, $24 billion, and our congressman voted for that program. Folks, this is the worst Congress. You should be ashamed.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman. Gentlemen, we're off to a good start. I detect a rhythm here. So given that, let's, Congressman Simpson, the first question comes to you. Do you, in fact, support an increase in minimum wage? If not, why not? 2 minutes.
Not at this time. I voted for an increase in the minimum wage before when it was $5.15 to $7.25. With unemployment at the rate it is, even the CBO, which is a nonpartisan organization, says it'll cost the American economy 500,000 jobs. There are other estimates up to 2.3 million jobs that it will cost the economy. When you look at unemployment among youth, we're looking at 16 to 18%. When you look at teen unemployment, it's nearly 25%. We need to get the economy moving is what we need to do. The best thing for low-income workers is a job. And we shouldn't be taking away those jobs. So I don't think raising the minimum wage is the right way to address it. There are other ways that actually work better, that have a better effect on the poverty rates, reducing the poverty rates, and that's the earned income tax credit. That's something that we could do, and I think we could get through. So I would rather go that direction than the government mandating increasing the minimum wage. 21 states have a higher minimum wage than the federal government does. They've decided to do that. Idaho could raise the minimum wage themselves if they chose to do that. I don't think the federal government needs to step in and say that. do that. But there are other things that we could do to help increase the minimum wage. Like I said, the earned income tax credit. The other thing you have to think about, and it's more complicated than just saying we're going to raise the minimum wage and that's going to help everybody out. There are people, particularly if you look at families who are a single mother with 2 women and so forth, it is the total net income that they have to work with, not just the wage rate that they're getting. They also oftentimes have the earned income tax credit, the refundable child tax credit, the housing subsidies, TANF, and other SNAP programs and other types of things, which are based on income. And to some extent, at those people that are getting up at the higher level of that, they will actually reduce those benefits by increasing the minimum wage, and they may come out, according to some records, at a lower rate by doing that.
Thank you. Congressman Stallings, 2 minutes.
Very little of that do I agree with. If there were so many other good ideas, where are they? Why haven't they been implemented? Why do we leave people just a month before election and say, oh, we've got these other great ideas? The simple solution that Romney's calling for, that I'm calling for, the President's calling for, a majority of Congress is calling for, is raise the minimum wage. It costs nothing. It's easily done. We stage it in over 2 or 3 years, and all of a sudden people, 176,000 Idahans, are lifted out of poverty. That's a $5,000 raise for these single moms. The reason the budget says, or the CEO says, that there will be 500,000 fewer jobs is because a lot of these moms that are working 2 jobs will give up one of them. With this new incomes, she'll be able to stay home with her kids and give them a little more family time. For the party that expresses family values, these folks are doing everything they can to hurt these families. It is unconscionable that you put people in this kind of a box and make no allowance for them. Raising the minimum wage is the simple solution. We could do it quickly. If I'm elected, I will work very, very hard in this next Congress to make that happen.
Thank you. 1 minute rebuttal.
Well, the fact
Simpson.
is contrary to what the Congressman just said, there is not the votes for it in Congress right now. That's the reality. But you could do other things that will work better than just the minimum wage. The minimum wage is kind of the easy way to say, let's just raise the minimum wage and tell employers what they have to pay and so forth. You've got to get this economy moving. And you can't do it by eliminating 500,000 jobs and to say that those 500,000 are giving up a job that you currently have and only having one job is just nonsense. It would cost the economy 500,000 jobs that will not be available. And I said some estimates are upwards of 2.3 million jobs. You can't do it at a time when the economy is in the state it's in. This is the slowest recovery we had under this administration of any recession in the history of this country. We have passed in the House 243 bills, I think, or no, 343 bills sitting in the Senate that Harry Reid won't take up. Many of them deal with improving the economy, and Harry Reid just sits on them.
Congressman, I'm going to ask a follow-up question to your last remarks, and you'll have 2 minutes to answer this. What would you propose as a means of trying to increase the number of jobs in this country, and would you support a public jobs bill?
What we do, what the government can do is help create the environment that helps job growth. You cannot have the highest corporate tax rate in the world, the highest corporate tax rate in the world, and compete in a global economy. That's what we have today. And we have a 19th century tax code that doesn't fit the 21st century. We need to reform the tax code. I could give you examples that you would just shake your head and go, man, is that stupid? Yeah. But there are, so we need total tax reform in this country, which we've been working on. There were some talking papers that were put out by the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee about what it would look like. I think we're going to get to it next year because that's part of the bigger solution to our debt and deficit problem. Both tax reform and entitlement reform are absolutely necessary if you are going to get us back to a balanced budget. Getting this economy moving means getting back towards a balanced budget where you're not spending $500 billion more every year than you have, and creating the environment, and that's both the federal level and the state level, where businesses can grow and expand. That's how you address the poverty level, and that's how you address the economy in this country.
Thank you. Congressman Stallings, the question to you. How would you propose to get the economy moving, to increase jobs, and would you support a public jobs bill?
First of all, there were a number of opportunities for Congress to create jobs. There was a highway bill the President proposed. When I was in the Congress, they passed automatically. We felt that highway construction, infrastructure repair was automatic. It was a bipartisan issue. These folks won't do that. They refuse to pass the kind of highway bill that we need. That would have created 1 million+ jobs. And so there have been opportunities out there for to do that. Yes, I would support a jobs bill. I think it's incredibly important that we give people work. Some of these folks have been out of work now for 6 or 7 years. And I think that's really putting folks in a hard situation where they are unable to feed their family, and so they have to rely on government support services to make it. But in spite of his rhetoric, this is the Congress that also tried to take away the food stamps to help these very poor, these folks that are oppressed, these folks that have been out of jobs for so long. Highway bills, jobs bills, a number of things have been proposed. It doesn't even get on a hearing on the floor. Again, there are votes, I think, in the Congress to pass a lot of this stuff. But when you have a speaker and a few colleagues that block virtually everything, nothing's going to get passed. And so I can just assure you folks, this has been the worst Congress in history, and I'm not sure if the next one won't even be worse.
Thank you. Shifting gears now. Next question.
Do I get a moment to respond to that?
If you'd like a minute, I'll give you a minute.
Yeah, first of all, we didn't try to take away the food stamp program, and the fact is that we've been passing bills in the House, and they've been sitting over on the Senate's desk, on Harry Reid's desk, and he won't bring them to the floor for a vote or a debate or a discussion. The Senate hasn't been passing anything. The highway program, when Richard was in Congress, the fact is the gas tax covered the amount that was spent on the highway fund. Today, it's about $40 billion in the hole. That means you take money out of the general fund that goes to other things to try to make that whole, or you reform the program. We're in the process of trying to reform the program. When you've got cars now getting 30 miles to the gallon or 50 or miles to the gallon rather than the 15 to 20 they used to get, you spend less on gas tax, drive the same miles on the road, put the same wear and tear. We've got to rethink how we fund the infrastructure of this country. It's not as easy as the former congressman would like you to believe.
One more minute to you, if you like.
There are other options, and part of it be if Congress would work. When I was there, we worked 5 days a week. We worked full month. These guys are working part-time jobs. I mean, what a great part-time job. $174,000 to work 3 or 4 weeks or days a month. I mean, wow. If my single moms out there could get that kind of an operation, we would not have the poverty we have in this state. If these guys would work full-time, if they would put in an honest day's work for what they're getting, like we Idahoans have to do, we would certainly get more productivity out of the Congress, but they don't want to work very hard. They spend most of their time out in the district. The latest example, the ISIS issue. Instead of voting on it, they fled home. I mean, folks, this is a Congress that has shirked its duty. If, Mr. Simpson for years was a practicing medical provider, dentist, and he was taught from the very beginning, do no harm. If malpractice was an option, Congress would be sued for malpractice.
Okay, gentlemen, on to the next question. and this comes to you, Congressman Stallings. Do you support the President's designation of the Boulder White Clouds region as a national monument under the President's authority granted to him by the Antiquities Act?
At this point, no. At this point, I don't, because I think, and I used to give Mr. Simpson's credit for his Cedar proposal, which was an attempt to resolve that. But if you listen to Mr. Rich the other night, the reason that's not gone anywhere is because Mr. Simpson has allowed it to be watered down by the liberals. Now, I'm not sure who he's talking about, so he can't support something that's been tainted by the liberals. And yet Mr. Simpson continues to introduce it. I think some kind of designation is necessary up there, but I'm not sure I will go for monument designation right now because there's some counties that are very much in peril. While Blaine County is well prepared for that kind of change, Custer County isn't. Custer County would have the infrastructure problems. Custer County does not have the lodging or the food and restaurants, and they don't have the kinds of rescue vehicles they need. You would have a heavy burden on Custer County with no resources. I think before anything is done, Custer County needs to have some basic needs met. Then we could look at either some kind of monument designation, but at this point, I would not support it.
Congressman Simpson, 2 minutes.
Doing a national monument is not the right way to protect the Boulder White Clouds. Doing a wilderness bill is. That's what I've been working on over the years, is a plan that's developed by Idahoans that would enact this and protect that area. A national monument designation, the administration can really put the management plan and make it anything they want to make it. There is no restriction on what they could do. And in fact, when they expanded the the craters of the moon by designating additional monument status there, some 260,000 acres. We were told at the time that the hunting practices and stuff in that expanded area would stay the same. We wouldn't change that. But then once they enacted, what they found out is we don't hunt in national monuments. So we had to go in and pass a bill to change the name of it. The expanded area is now a preserve. It's not a national monument. So a national monument designation, I think, is the wrong way to do it. I'll continue to work on the Boulder White Clouds. When you talk about Custer County and the needs that they're going to have, guess what? We've been working on that. There's a new community center in Custer County. Guess why? Because we got the funding to do that, because it was part of the deal on CEDRA, or the Central Idaho Economic Development and Recreation Act, that I have been working on. This plan was developed in Idaho, and it's the way I think we ought to do it, and I've made that clear to every official from the administration that's talked to me about it.
Congressman Stallings, a 1-minute rebuttal.
Yeah, my discussions with the Custer County Commissioners, a lot of things that you promised in that bill have been stripped out. That the land that was supposed to be given to Chalice and to Mackey have been taken out. That some of the remuneration to deal with infrastructure have been taken out. They're no longer quite as fond of it as they were when you cut the deal. I think if you're going to promote something, you get people to come on, then you ought to stay with the program. I think that this going back and making the changes that you accuse them to do on the craters of the moon, you're doing essentially the same thing on the craters. And for that reason, until we get some things written in stone, I would not be supportive of that program.
Thank you. This next question on immigration comes to you, Congressman Simpson. Last year, the Idaho media reported that about 75% of the Idaho dairy farmers are illegal immigrants. Congressman Labrador put that figure at 90%. Do you think that that Idaho farm workers should be granted amnesty, or should the INS take steps to deport those workers as the law requires, and which is being done around America?
Well, obviously, we have to fix the immigration system in this country. And contrary to what Mr. Stallings said about me wanting to ship back his employee that's a dreamer, I support the Dreamer program, as a matter of fact. And I think that we shouldn't send them back because they have no country to send them back to. They came here as children, and what are they going to do at the border? Tell their mother, I'm not going because you're going illegally? They had no choice when they came here. And we should recognize that. And if they want to serve in the military, if they want to go to college, they ought to be able to do so. And I have no problem with that, and have told the sponsor of the bill I'd support it. So there's another false statement you've been saying about me, along with several others. But we do have to reform the immigration system. There's no doubt about it. We've got to have stronger border security, especially with things like Ebola coming and other things. We've got to address that. That's a key aspect of immigration reform. Then we've got to have a guest worker program that actually works, that gets the workers in here that we need, both in agriculture and in other industries. And then we've got to decide what you're going to do with the 14 or so million people that are here illegally. Nobody really knows what the number is, but we always throw around 14 million. What are you going to do with them? Does anybody really believe we're going to deport 14 million people? We're not. We don't have enough buses or airplanes to deport 14 million people, and it would be devastating to our economy. What can you do without giving them an advantage over people trying to come here legally through the normal immigration process? What you can do is give them permanent green card status, which allows them to stay here and work, brings them out of the shadows, allows them to pay taxes and participate in society instead of being in the shadows, but not citizenship. If they want citizenship, then they have to go through the regular process that everybody else goes through, the people back in their countries trying to come here through the normal legal process. These people that came illegally should not get an advantage for doing that. Let them apply through the normal process. They don't have to go back to their country to reapply, but they do have to apply for citizenship if they're going to come.
Time. Thank you. 2 minutes to you, Congressman.
Well, this is news. I hope that we've got breaking news rolling along the bottom of the screen, because when they had the vote at the end of the Congress to deal with the refugee problem, these 50, 60,000 children that came up from Central America, there's a provision put by Mr. Boehner and the Republicans to defund the DACA program that he's talking about and to deport more of these people. He's absolutely right. The dairy industry would go broke without these folks. But I do not believe making them second-class citizens is a step in the right direction. We have never had second-class citizens. There's no provision in the Constitution for second-class citizens. And they want to create a new class of people that will be able to come here and work but have no political power, so that there will always be a cloud hanging over their head. Folks, that is not acceptable. We are a nation of immigrants. I had a friend from the Shoban tribe that said if his people had better immigration policies, they wouldn't have to put up with any of us, whites or otherwise. And he says, right, we had to go back and go after those guys because that's a lousy immigration policy. We have a bad immigration policy. We're not going to deport those kind of people. Our economy is too solid. We need to make this thing happen. They could pass it tomorrow. The Senate passed a version of this immigration reform. LDS Church has called out for it. The Chamber of Commerce is calling out for it. It is an issue that we need to solve. We can solve it. We need to bring these people out of the shadows. We're a nation of immigrants. My folks came over. I'm not sure they came over legally because there was no illegal or legal process when they came here. This is hogwash that we keep these folks in the shadow and make them second-class citizens. They're an important part of the economy. They ought to have some say in how their own lives are going and what their future should be. They should be able to participate in the American dream. As second-class citizens, they would not have that opportunity.
Thank you. 1 minute to you, Congressman Simpson.
The program that we voted on at the end of the Congress had really nothing to do with the current immigration problem. It's that you had children being sent to this country by their parents in Guatemala and Honduras on a 1,000-mile trip that was dangerous to these kids. They were being used in the sex trade, in the drug trade, and other things. Many of them were actually being killed. They were paying $7,000 to come up from Honduras and stuff by these coyotes. That was a real problem. We had to address that. We treated them differently than we treated kids that came from Mexico. If you come from Mexico, you automatically get deported. What we had to do is send to Honduras and Guatemala the message that, no, we're not going to automatically accept them, because they were being told, if you cross the river, you're there, and they won't deport you. That made passing immigration reform much more difficult. So we're trying to deal with that. It seems like Richard and I kind of agree on immigration to a large degree. I just don't think you automatically make people citizens and give them an advantage over those people that are trying to come here through the legal process.
Thank you. Sticking to internal matters for the moment, Congressman Stallings, this question comes to you. Several federal courts and most recently the United States Supreme Court have struck down state laws that would require photo ID before people can vote. Do you support those judicial decisions that prohibit the requirement of photo ID?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This Congress is bent on making it tougher for minorities to vote. That's all this photo ID law is about, to try to make it tougher for old people, for people that of color, for people that may live on the fringes, so they won't vote. Their idea is if we can't win by good ideas, let's limit the electorate. I think it has been terribly wrong what's happened in a number of states where they've done everything they can to limit the vote. For 200 years, we've done everything we can to expand vote. I mean, we brought the blacks into the process with the 14th and 15th Amendment. We brought women into the process. We lowered the voting age. We've done a number of things to expand the vote. For the first time in our nation's history, ladies and gentlemen, these guys are trying to restrict voting. There's a number of Republican governors that are going out of their way. In fact, they even admit it, that they will not have the kind of vote turnout from minorities, from people that they don't want voting because they believe that these folks just pollute the voting pool. I think that this is a country, when Thomas Jefferson said all men are created equal, he didn't mean only except in times of voting or except in times of jobs. Everyone should have the same opportunities in this country. While I know that they're much more susceptible to the wishes of the wealthy, the well-to-do, I think the poor people that make up the vast majority of this country ought to have the same rights that the constituency that Mr. Simpson seems to play to.
Thank you. Congressman Simpson, do you support the idea of requiring photo ID at the voting polls?
I thought Richard just said that he supported that and then talked against it. Do you support that or
no,
not?
I do not.
Okay.
Under no circumstances.
You know, I want everyone that is qualified to vote to have the right to vote and have the opportunity to vote and make it as easy as possible for those individuals to vote. But I also want the vote to be untainted. Now, in Chicago, you can vote as many times as you like, even from a graveyard. That's a problem. So what these states are trying to do is not restrict the vote. And in fact, when they require a photo ID, and it's not something that I support, I don't think it's necessary here in Idaho, but what they're trying to do is they actually have gone out and said, we will give you a photo ID. We will come to your community and give you a government ID card so that you can vote and stuff, at no charge to you. They're not trying to restrict the vote. They're trying to ensure the vote being, that it's untainted, because I'll tell you, the worst thing to have in a democracy where everybody can vote is people that abuse the vote. So I understand what they're trying to do. I think we ought to put back in the Voting Rights Act that was recently repealed by the Supreme Court, or at least that portion of it that was repealed by the Supreme Court. We need to work on trying to make it constitutional again and putting the voting rights back in, because I just believe everybody that wants to vote ought to have the right to vote, and it ought to be as easy to do as possible. Thank you.
1 minute back to you, if you'd like.
Well, I agree with him. I think that's admirable. I wish he would sign on to some legislation like that. I know that Sensenbrenner back there was trying to promote that, and I don't think he had any support from your caucus. But I think it is something that we have to do. That Voting Rights Act was instrumental in changing the makeup of this country. It was instrumental in giving people of color the right to vote and express themselves. It was instrumental in forcing governments to recognize all people as being important and having dignity. And when you allow a government to deny people to vote because of the color of their skin or their sex or their gender, that's wrong. This country has no business doing that. And if we believe strongly in the principles of the Declaration of Independence, principles of the Constitution, that there is no place for that kind of nonsense.
Thank you. We've reached that time in the program now. Well, I'll invite each candidate to ask the other a question. Congressman Simpson, you have the first opportunity to pose a question to your opponent.
Well, let me ask, since you've brought up John Boehner so frequently and trashed him to some degree.
I'm not alone in that.
Well, I don't suspect you are. You've said that if elected, you would support Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. Are you still there? Especially since over the news reports that I've seen over the last several weeks is that Democrats across the country running for office are running away from her as fast as they can. Do you still support Nancy for Speaker?
Listen, I don't run away from anyone. That's why I find that your positions have been kind of strange. I don't run away. Will I support her? Probably not. I hope someone else is running. If they're not, then yeah, if it was between she and Boehner, there's no question. That's a no-brainer. But I may have the third option. I may vote for myself, because I think I could do a better job than either of them.
1 minute of rebuttal to you, if you like, Congressman Simpson.
Well, then you're bolder than I am, because I wouldn't take that job if they'd give it to me. It is a difficult job, and I will tell you, after all the trashing that's been gone on here by my opponent about John Boehner is trying to get the House back to regular order, where we actually debate bills, we bring them to the floor, amendments are offered, and we vote them up or down. Guess what? That was the problem under Nancy Pelosi. I believe that she was one of the worst speakers we've had, because she forgot what her job was. And the job of the Speaker is to protect the institution of the House, the partisan jobs of the majority leader and minority leader. She brought bills to the floor, didn't allow amendments to them. We did appropriation bills where they would allow 3 or 4 amendments. You know how many amendments we have on appropriation bills now? I think I had over 100 on the energy and water bill that I was in charge of. When I was in charge of the interior bill, we had over 200 amendments. People ought to have a right to amend bills and to offer proposals that they believe are in the benefit of the country. Nancy never allowed that to happen. It was the most closed process I have ever seen in my life.
Thank you. And now, Congressman Stallings, you have an opportunity to pose a question to your opponent.
Yeah, there's one that I've been puzzling over. We witnessed up to the primary, probably the nastiest primary campaign in the history of the state. You took primary campaigns to a new low. You spent $5+ million bashing Brian Smith. Now, Brian was supported by some guys, and Brian was a former student of mine when I taught up at Rick's. And I asked him when I saw him where I went wrong, because obviously I didn't do a particularly good job with that. But I have never seen such a despicable campaign in which you blatantly distorted his record. You called him at least he feels that you were lying about his record. And my issue, have you called him since that time and apologized for that despicable exercise of crap throwing that you engaged in?
Well, that's your impression of the primary. I don't think it's an accurate description. For a year and a half, almost 2 years, the Club for Growth, the Heritage Foundation, the Freedom Foundation, and others have been running negative ads against my record, and guess what? I'm going to defend myself. And that's exactly what I did. And I would do it again, and no, we didn't spend $5.5 million. It was $5.5 million spent totally, not by me. So it is, primary campaigns are never pretty. That's just the reality.
Thank you. 1 minute of rebuttal to you, Congressman
So then you
Stallings.
stand by your argument that he collected debts from widows, that he collected debts from veterans, that he was, of all things, a trial lawyer? My hell, what a low that was.
That's true.
It is not true. I mean, he did no more than what you did when you were in a dental practice. You took your people that weren't paying the bills to a collection agency, and there may have been a widow in that. There may have been a veteran in that. And yet he didn't say, well, Simpson collects debts from widows and veterans. Come on, guy, that's a part of his business. He collects debts. And if there are widows in there, sure, he's going to. But to target that, to say somehow this guy is out collecting debts from widows, sounds like Snidely Whiplash from the old melodramas, for heaven's sakes, putting them on tracks if they don't do what the debt collector wants. That's nonsense. You know it's nonsense. It's despicable, and you owe him an apology.
There's nothing that we said that was not absolutely true in our campaigns. That's the reality. And I'm not sure, but I don't think Brian Smith is on the ballot in November. I think it's me and you.
Well, you're right. There you go.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you for that lively exchange. Speaking of hostilities, let's turn to foreign affairs for a moment.
Thank you.
And this question comes to you first, Congressman Simpson. Do you believe that President Obama has all the legal authority he needs to engage in military hostilities against ISIS without congressional authorization?
No. Do you want?
Whoa. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Whoa.
Pretty blunt. I don't think he does. I think Congress needs to debate and act on this. There is, when you go back through the history, some people suggest that if you're going to do this, you need to declare war. The United States has only declared war 11 times in 5 different conflicts. Most of the time, beginning with John Adams, it has been the authorization for the use of military force. And the president has never really asked for that. What they've asked for is support from Congress. Congress always gives their support by saying we'll authorize the use of military force, and the president, Republican or Democrat, have always said, well, I don't need your authority. I can do this under my provisions as commander-in-chief. I think that's a stretch of the imagination. I think Congress needs to debate this. I have told Mr. Boehner that that's what needs to happen, and we may do it when we get back. I don't know. John believes, and Nancy Pelosi both believe, that the president has the authority to act as he is acting currently. I think they're wrong.
Thank you. 2 minutes to you, Congressman
Well,
Stallings.
I certainly congratulate you, because that's the first time I heard that. Most of you guys fled. I mean, when the president put 2 proposals before you, one, go out, should we pick out the good guys in Syria and arm them? And secondly, you want to give me authority to do this? You cherry-picked and took the easy one, and I don't criticize you for your vote against that, because I'm not sure how I would have voted on that. I don't know how you pick out good guys in Syria. To me, that we couldn't do it 2 months ago. Why can we do it now? But on the other question, you guys broke and ran. I mean, the British Parliament gathered and within 48 hours came up with a resolution. You guys won't even talk about it. And now Boehner's saying boots on the ground? The president does not have the authority to do what he's doing. But unless Congress steps up and fulfills its constitutional obligations, then this is going to go on forever. No one's going to challenge the president on this. I think it is nonsense that you guys aren't back there debating this today. You're putting lives on the line. You're derelict in your responsibilities, and I think it is a terrible disservice to the Constitution that you were sworn to uphold and to the people of this country that you let this activity go on without speaking up. You're like a pack of mice on this issue. Come on. Where are the guts of this body that's supposed to be representing the people on these very, very important foreign issues?
Thank you. 1 minute back to you.
Well, I could go back to Washington, D.C. and stand on the House floor and say I demand a vote on this, but I'd be the only one there.
Well, maybe
so I
that's
don't know
what it
that
takes.
that's the right thing to do. The reality is that this is what I believe, and so far the leadership, either Democratic or Republican, have said that Congress needs to vote on this because they think the president already has the authority under both the 2001 and 2002 resolutions and also under his powers as the commander-in-chief. I happen to disagree with that, and I will continue to express my point of view on that Congress needs to vote on it. It's not a cut-and-run sort of thing. They think they have the authority to do it. That's the reality. I disagree with them.
Let me ask a follow-up question on this same topic, Congressman Stallings. Do you believe that Congress is exercising sufficient oversight over the executive branch when it comes to the conduct of foreign affairs, spying, wiretapping, and the like?
I do not. I don't think they conducted any oversight with Bush, and I think they're doing equally poorly over Obama. They seem to think once the laws are passed and they can go home for the weekend and let the country run as it wishes. This is not a dictatorship. It's not a Republican dictatorship or a Democratic dictatorship. The power for these decisions lies in the hands of Mr. Simpson and his 434 colleagues in the Congress. That is not happening. They're totally negligent in dealing with the oversight, with the abuses that's going on. I think the drone program is a disaster. I think the number of things that they're doing is wrong, and there's no oversight. Congress just sort of yawns and moves on to the next item, which is probably repealing Obamacare again.
Thank you. 2 minutes to you, Congressman Simpson. Do you believe Congress is conducting sufficient oversight on the executive branch when it comes to foreign affairs?
Well, that's a fascinating answer that the former congressman just gave, because we get criticized for having too much oversight over the administration and trying to tell them what to do, whether it's with the IRS scandal or with the eavesdropping by NSA, or whether it's any of the other Benghazi or any other things. We get criticized for having oversight over those activities. Our committees, the Intelligence Committee, and I'm good friends with the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, both in the House and the Senate. And I've talked to them at length about the hearings that they've had. And believe me, there is a lot of oversight that you don't see. I may agree or disagree with some of the things that the Intelligence Committee has authorized or seen as appropriate. But there is a lot going on in Congress in trying to oversee this administration particularly. Did we do enough of it in the Bush administration? Probably not.
Thank you. 1 minute back to you if you'd like, Congressman Stallings.
Well, I think that there have been oversights on so-called rumors. I think when you get folks like Darrell Isis who's out looking for a scandal anywhere he can, I think that you're, again, creating disservice to the country. I think there are legitimate places for Congress. During the World War II, Harry Truman led oversight on World War II and saved this country millions of dollars in abuses in the Roosevelt administration. It should not be a partisan issue. What you're looking at is the lives and limbs of young American men and women. You're looking at a situation where, in these kinds of circumstances, contractors will take advantage everywhere they can, and so Congress plays a vital role in oversight, in looking at how our money is spent, making sure that people are accountable for their actions. And, folks, that's not happening today.
Thank you. Next question to you, Congressman Simpson. Do you support legislation that would allow the country to move forward on managing spent fuel both at an interim location for storage, possibly in Idaho, and then permanently in a suitable final repository, not just at Yucca Mountain?
Well, that's one of the debates that we've been having, and one of the disagreements between the House and the Senate. Harry Reid wants to stop Yucca Mountain, and so does Barack Obama, and purely for political reasons. They did it. The administration did it to get 5 electoral votes in the first time he ran. Said the Yucca Mountain won't open under him. The reality is that we need both a permanent repository. Yucca Mountain is the most likely place for that to happen. But if we were to open Yucca Mountain tomorrow, it would be filled. So we also have to have an interim storage pilot program to start interim storage. I wouldn't do it in Idaho, but there are communities in both West Texas and in New Mexico that are very interested and put in, not applications, but express their desire to have an interim storage facility in their communities or in their locales. And what I'm trying to do, our problem is that in the House, my authorizing committees, the Commerce Committee, is afraid that if they authorized an interim storage facility, that it would take Yucca Mountain off the table. I'm trying to do both of them. We put money in our appropriation bill for Yucca Mountain. The Senate is putting money in for a pilot program on interim storage. I'm trying to meld the two together and bring both sides together, because the reality is we need both of them.
Thank you. Congressman Stallings?
Yeah, I disagree. Yucca Mountain's a waste of time. To bury that kind of material in a deep hole and for some engineer to say this is going to be safe for 10,000 years is pure nonsense. No engineer with a salt would sign to that kind of document. Plus, there's material in that spent fuel that will be valuable and someday will be needed. interim storage is really the only logical way to go, because we will then create this huge, massive mine of stuff that this nation may need in the fairly near future. I opposed Yucca Mountain for all kinds of reasons when I was nuclear waste negotiator, when I've worked with on the science committee. It was a dumb proposal then, and it's a dumb proposal now. We've spent billions of dollars digging this massive hole in the ground that I don't believe should and will ever be used, because it is not a good solution for our national. I think there are better ways to deal with it. I would support reprocessing, recycling some of those materials. I would totally support interim storage. We had a couple of sites ready to go until the Department of Energy pulled the plug on my office because, like you said, they don't want anything to compete with Yucca Mountain. But, ladies and gentlemen, Yucca Mountain is not going to be opened.
Thank you. 1 minute back to you, Congressman
I'm
Simpson.
surprised we have to debate this issue since you were the nuclear waste negotiator. I thought we'd have it solved by now, but apparently we don't. But the reality is there has been 52 studies by scientists that he thinks are nuts, National Academy of Sciences and others, that say Yucca Mountain is a valid and the right place to do this, that it can be done there. And the fact is you don't have to dig it back up. It's a retrievable facility, if you don't know that. So you can take stuff out of there, too. So there go your arguments. It's political is all it is.
Next question now to you, Congressman Stallings. On campaign finance, do you believe that the vast amount of money spent in our elections, much of it by unidentified donors and in unidentifiable amounts, has corrupted our political system? If not, why not?
I think it has. I think that kind of spending, particularly from folks we don't I know who is, I think is absolutely wrong. I think for Mr. Simpson and Mr. Smith, if he says it's right, $5.5 million in a primary was just absolutely outrageous. That money could have been used in so many positive ways. I think spending in campaigns is essential, but if it means that we owe our souls to special interests, then we've corrupted the system, and I'm afraid that's what happens. When Exxon can come before the Congress and say, gee, we need these subsidies. We give the big oil companies about $4 billion a year in subsidies, but we won't give single moms a dime because somehow that will corrupt the system. Why does Exxon need those kinds of subsidies? Well, it's because they bought the Congress. They've bought enough members of both parties. I'm not saying this is just a Republican issue. Both parties have been corrupted by this huge amounts of money that flow in. As a result, you, the people, me, the folks that make up the 2nd District of Idaho are totally ignored. That's why so many of these critical issues just go floating by that they don't pay a moment's attention to. But when Exxon calls, well, these guys are right at attention. When GE calls, these folks listen very closely because they're the paymasters. These guys are just on the string doing as they're told.
Congressman Simpson, 2 minutes to you.
I know that's a popular point of view, but it's just nonsense. That's the reality, is it's nonsense. And I get disgusted by it, quite frankly. But when I first ran for Congress in 1998, they told me that it would probably cost about $500,000. I had a primary and a general election against Mr. Stallings.
We did.
I think we had to raise a little over $1 million, $1.2 million, if I remember correctly, during that primary campaign, or during that general election campaign. Somebody would have told me at the time that you're going to have to raise, at some point, we raised about $2 million, $2.2 million in our primary. The rest of it was outside expenditures, not money that we raised, fully disclosed, who donated to us and everything else. I probably would have never run for Congress. Because I'll tell you, there's one thing I hate doing more than anything else, and that's raising money. And I think most members of Congress feel the same way about that. But I don't know what you do about it, because what do you do when it's a free speech issue? Should businesses and PACs have the right to contribute to who represents them, just like individuals can? And remember what a PAC is. A PAC is a collection of employees that contribute to a PAC, and then they donate to a candidate that represent their interest. Guess what? Exxon can't contribute to my campaign. GE can't contribute to my campaign. None of them can. Only individuals can. We can't take corporate money. That's why all the rhetoric that's out there by some is just nonsense.
1 minute back to you, Congressman.
Well, I don't know where that $5.5 million came from. Do you? I don't think there's that many individuals out here that could cough up that kind of money. There are big givers in this country that, when Sheldon Adelson can spend $10 million on Newt Gingrich, that's somehow not quite the same as what you're suggesting. When the Koch brothers can dump money into every congressional district in this nation, that's not exactly what he's saying. I think money is corrupted, and here's what these guys have done. They brought down the ratings of the president. He's down in the low 40s, but they brought down their own ratings. They're down 8, 9, 10% approval. And the court itself, because of stupid decisions like Citizens United that just opened the floodgates to this money, are corrupting the system. Their approval ratings down in the 20%. That means the vast majority have not a lot of use for the president, even less use for the Congress, and the court they would be willing to change in a heartbeat. They're ruining the system. Money is the basis of this ruination. And ladies and gentlemen, Mike does have another option. You don't have to take the money.
Thank you. Congressman Simpson, this question's to you. Section 1333 of the Affordable Health Care Act permits states to engage in the formation of multi-state compacts as a means of lowering costs for Idahoans to purchase insurance. Would you encourage the governor of Idaho and the state of Idaho to seek out and form multi-state compacts?
I've always supported that idea from the very beginning. Back before the Affordable Care Act was passed, there was several pieces of legislation that I think would have helped with the health care system, allowing individuals to deduct the cost of their health care insurance. Corporation deducts it as a part of doing business, so if a corporation is buying your health insurance, paying for your health insurance, they get to deduct that. If you're a farmer out there that buy your own health insurance, you can't deduct that. That doesn't make sense, so we ought to be able to do that. You ought to be able to, if you want to increase competition in the insurance market, allow individuals to buy insurance across state lines, which is just what you're talking about. I can buy my automobile insurance in Alabama if I want to, but I can't buy my health care insurance in Alabama if I want to. And I ought to be able to buy insurance from the company that supplies the policy that meets my needs, wherever it's located. But there's been a great deal of resistance to that. But, you know, part of the Health Care Act was trying to increase competition with these exchanges and so forth. You could have done it very simply by allowing insurance to be sold across state lines.
2 minutes to you on that question.
I would be interested if Mr. Simpson actually introduced those in that debate over the Affordable Care Act. I was not aware of one Republican that made any effort to amend it or to change it or to improve it. Their rhetoric was destroy it, kill it, let's end it. But yes, I think what Idaho is doing is borders on criminal. When you've got 80,000 poor Idahoans that can't get health insurance because Mr. Otter and his band of brothers in the legislature decided they want to punish the White House for putting into this law. As a result, 80,000 Idahoans are denied any health insurance. $60 to $100 million, I guess millions of dollars, is left on the table because we don't want it. We're going to turn it back. It's our tax dollars, and yet these characters, for lack of a better word, refuse to accept that. And so do you know where these poor people get their health care? The hospital, in the emergency ward. Do you want to know a more expensive health care than emergency room health care? I don't think there exists one. You punish these people for a personal annoyance at the White House. You take our tax dollars and send it back to Washington. Now, you don't have any problems taking tax dollars to support the INL. That's a legitimate expenditure. Why is health care for poor people, for Medicaid recipients, such an abhorrent idea? It should have been done years ago, and this state administration, state Republican Party ought to be held accountable for the refusal to take care of this very, very poor group that essentially some will die because of their callousness.
1 minute back to you, Congressman Simpson.
If you want to know why I didn't offer any of those amendments that I talked about during the debate on the Affordable Care Act, because it was under a closed rule, and Speaker Pelosi would not allow debate or amendments to the bill. That's the reality. That's the problem with her as Speaker, is that she didn't allow any other good ideas to come up. She closed off debate. Expansion of Medicaid, which is, I guess, what you were talking about, the state will make that decision, whether it's in their best interest or not. The one thing that bothers me is that people say, well, it's federal money, like it's free, like somebody else is paying for it. You know, there are no other taxpayers. There are not local government taxpayers, state taxpayers, and federal taxpayers. There's only you. And it's going to get paid for by you. So when the federal government pays for it, it is your tax dollars, just like it is. It's not free money. It's just like if the state did it. So while I think expansion of Medicaid is something that the state ought to look at, They are concerned that the federal government will pay it all for 2 years, and then we'll have to pick up a portion of it, and they don't have the plans on how they'd pick it up.
Thank you. Gentlemen, we've nearly reached the end of our allotted time, so we'd now like to turn to concluding remarks. And Congressman Simpson, may we hear some concluding remarks from you for 3 minutes, please?
Sure. Again, I want to thank the City Club of Idaho Falls for hosting this discussion, and to all of you for being here today. It's been lively and interesting. We've discussed some challenges facing this country, and it should come as no surprise that there are differences of opinion on how to address these challenges that we face and what the proper role of government is. And actually, if there is a role for government, what the proper level of government, state, local, or federal, is to address those problems. After all, I mean, like I say, this should be as no surprise. After all, this is the most diverse country in the world. If you find a race, a religion, an ethnicity, a political or an economic philosophy found anywhere in the world, you will find it represented somewhere in this country. And we elect people to represent us and to advocate for the beliefs that a majority of us share. But once we're elected, we're also elected to represent all the people of the state, sometimes people that have different ideas than we have. It's my job to listen to people that I agree with and to listen to people that I disagree with, and to make decisions that I believe are in the best interests of this state, this country, and my district. When I was in Congress one day, I was presiding over the floor, and the issue of states' rights came up. And you know, in the western United States, states' rights it's like there's the Bible on the right hand and states' rights and the 10th Amendment on the left hand. Sometimes we get them confused. Sometimes we think the 10th Amendment was written in the Bible. That's how strongly we feel about it. And Westerners were getting up talking about states' rights. And then a guy got up from Georgia, black Congressman John Lewis, marched with Martin Luther King in the Civil Rights Movement. Famous picture of him on Selma Courthouse steps with blood running down his forehead where he was beat by the police. John Lewis had a different take on states' rights. He came during an era when it was the southern states that were abusing the rights of blacks, and it was the federal government that stepped in and said, no, you can't do that. If you don't understand that about John Lewis and where he comes from, you'll never get very far trying to convince John Lewis of anything. It's my job to work with others that are elected in Congress, the other members of Congress, both in the House and the Senate, be they Republican, Democrat, or Independent, to find solutions. While people elect us based on our philosophies and what we would do, in the end, what they want is solutions to the problems that face this country. I built a career out of doing just that, and will continue to do so if reelected, and that's why I'd ask for your vote on November 4th, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Congressman. Congressman Stallings, please.
Well, I also appreciate you being here. I appreciate this opportunity to take a few moments. I appreciate the issues that have been raised, the questions that have been raised. I think it's very important that we have this discussion. People are not sure they're even going to vote in this off-year election. They see somehow that if it's not a presidential election, it's not important. Ladies and gentlemen, this has got to be one of the most important elections in our nation's history. You have governors at stake, you have legislators at stake, and you have Congress, and a big part of the Senate's at stake. And the next 2 or 4 or 6 years will be determined by what happens this November. Now, I have argued that this is the worst Congress in our nation's history, and Mr. Simpson hasn't really disputed that. He recognized that Boehner's proposal, that judging by what they repeal, has been also a failure. This has been a terrible, terrible Congress. And as long as you have the Republican Party that's so divided, with the Tea Party crowd on one side and the Boehner Republicans on another side, I'm not sure Boehner can ever bring that crowd under control. And so my suggestion to you is how badly you want change. If you think Congress is doing a good job, and only 9 or 10 or 12% of the population thinks that's the case, then by all means stay with Mr. Simpson, because he's going to give you 2 more years of the same nonsense. There will be no change. I mean, he's talked about a number of things that he thought they might do. They can't do them. The Tea Party won't allow it. They can't pass the kinds of things that he's suggesting. And so you'll have 2 more years of bitterly contested, stupid issues. They're even talking about another government shutdown. I don't understand that kind of mentality. Congress is elected to help people, to take care of the nation's problems. These folks haven't done it. I can assure you the 2 more years with the same crowd will give you the same results. Wasn't Einstein that said to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results is a definition of insanity? If you want change, then I'm your answer. If you want things to stay as they've done, and stay with Mr. Simpson, because he has essentially said that's what you'll get for 2 more years. Thank you for allowing us to be here.
Thank you, gentlemen, both of you, for a very spirited, lively debate. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Richard.